When we talked about scales being a fixed set of intervals, I said that if you change one of the intervals, it is no longer that scale. So if I was to take this G major scale and then make this E and E flat, it would no longer be the G major scale. But you might also be thinking, no, I think that is the G major scale, it's just got a flat 6. So the question then is, where is the line between just an alteration to a scale and a new scale altogether? Welcome to the 4th video on the theory of scales. If you have not watched the first 3, I encourage you to go do so and then come back here. Let's start by looking at classifications of scales. Most of the scales that we're familiar with are asymmetrical scales, meaning they can't be divided nicely down the middle. Think major scale, minor scale, blues scale, pentatonic scale. Asymmetrical scales typically have some sort of home base and a pitch hierarchy. Symmetrical scales, on the other hand, you guessed it, are symmetrical. Symmetrical scales don't have that home base. It doesn't matter which note you start on, it will sound the same. The whole tone scale, of course, is one of these symmetrical scales. It only contains whole tones. So the really big, unnecessary musical word of the day is anhemitonic, which means it lacks half steps. You will find that word useful for sure. Now, what that means is that there's only a couple, and by that I mean 2, whole tone scales. So we could only start the whole tone scale in 2 different places. Any other, quote, starting pitch would actually just map the scale back onto one of these 2 whole tone scales. Composer Oliver Messiaen called this a mode of limited transposition, of which there are 7 modes of limited transposition. Only 2 of them have really become popular. The whole tone scale, and then of course there's the octatonic scale. There's only 2 whole tone scales, but there's 3 octatonic scales. The octatonic scale alternates half steps and whole steps, so again, there's not really a home base. The octatonic scale, by the way, has got translational symmetry, which is different than the inversional symmetry that we typically think about. So what that means in this discussion of symmetrical scales is if we were to take one of those pitches in a symmetrical scale and change it, it would completely alter the fundamental purpose of these scales, which is namely to be symmetrical. Hey there, Jesse from the future hopping in here to let you know that I've got a PDF guide that goes along with this Theory of Scales series that covers everything that we're going to cover in the 4 videos. And it even includes this scales and modes tasting notes chart, so to speak, that tells you all of the scales and modes and 5 of their characteristic sounds. So if you would like that, make sure to check it out in the description below. It's also available as a bundle with all of my other scales and modes PDF guides. So if you'd like that, it's in the description. Let's get back to the video. So keep that in mind. If you change a pitch within a symmetrical scale, it completely changes the function and the purpose. The essence of the scale has been changed. So now that we've taken a look at asymmetrical versus symmetrical scales, let's actually dive into the question of the hour. What makes something an alteration of a scale and what makes something a new scale altogether? Music theory seeks to identify patterns. So an example of that might be, wow, a whole bunch of songs use this exact same set of intervals. Maybe we should come up with a name for it. And the name we came up with is the major scale. The difference between being an alteration to a scale and a new scale altogether is how much the structure of the scale changes. So if we were to take a look at just what makes an alteration or a variation of a scale, we're looking at minor structural changes. A good example of this is the harmonic minor scale, which is a variant of the natural minor scale. It's been given this leading tone right here, for the sake of harmony. Or perhaps the Lydian dominant scale, which is an alteration of the Lydian mode. In this variation, the Lydian mode is given a flat 7, which would create a dominant chord within the scale. Some instead might call this the Lydian flat 7 mode, and that tells you exactly what has been altered. Others might call this the 4th mode of the ascending melodic minor scale. I, on the other hand, learned this as the poorly named acoustic scale. The point is, naming things is hard. But you'll notice in both the harmonic minor scale and the Lydian dominant scale, only one note has been altered. Of course, it doesn't always work to just take a scale or a mode and then alter one note and it become something different. Like, for example, if we were to take the mixed Lydian scale and take this 7 right here and to make it a sharp 7, well, now we have a really good joke for April 1st. because now it's just a major scale. Speaking of modes, what do we do with modes? Is this a new scale altogether, or is it just an alteration, a variation of the major scale? There are a lot of uses for the word mode in music, so I'll be clear about what we're talking about here. A mode in this case is a type of scale that is derived from a parent scale. And most of the time, what we're talking about is the 7 modes of the major scale. Typically, this involves starting on a different note while maintaining the original sequence of intervals. Modes are what we call rotational scales, meaning that if I was to take this major scale and then move the starting note up an octave, which this is a compositional technique known as rotation, then I've got the Dorian mode. Do that again and move this starting pitch up an octave, and now I have the Phrygian mode. Modes are interesting from a music theory perspective because some would consider them to be very clearly just a derivative of their parent scale. Others would say that they're new scales altogether because their characteristics are so vastly different than the major scale. So, which is it? Again, people have different opinions, but I'm pretty inclined very strongly to say that they are variants of their parent scale. The relationship in this collection of pitches is just too strong for me to see it the other way. Historically, the 9th century Frankish monks would probably disagree with me, but I've made peace with that. Historical joking aside, it's important to note from that my definition is based on the way that I see that we currently use scales and modes. 1100 years from now, they might have a completely different definition of modes altogether, and they might use them completely differently than we do now, much like we use modes differently than the Frankish monks did in the 9th century. Music is an art. Music theory is also an art. So what then would make something a separate scale altogether? I would say if there's more than like 2 changes and the tonal function is completely different, then I would say that's a different scale. To give you an exaggerated example, I suppose we could call this collection of pitches Ionian, sharp 4, flat 6, flat 7, oh, and it's missing a 5. If we compare that to the actual Ionian mode, major scale, not only are there a lot of differences between the 2 sets of notes, the tonal function is also completely different. And in fact, the tonal function is completely missing. So what that would tell me is that we're probably dealing with a completely separate scale at this point. And that completely separate scale in this case is the whole tone scale. Like I said, that is an exaggeration, but hopefully it makes the point. So now that we've made it here to the end of this video series on scales, what are the takeaways that we should keep with us as we go to apply this to our music making? So for all musicians, scales are tools for you to expand your musical toolbox. Recognizing scale patterns accelerates your musical learning. Scales shape musical perception and expression. Mastery of scales improves improvisation and adaptability. And understanding scale relationships makes music more cohesive. But different types of musicians might have more specific individualized takeaways. So let's look at some different groups. For composers, understanding the theory of scales helps you expand your harmonic palette. It makes intentional and not default scale choices. And then it also allows you to build thematic coherence within your music. If you're a performer, then learning the theory of scales will do 3 things. Accelerate your learning and your memorization. It will enhance your expressivity, and it improves your technical fluency. For music theorists, this will refine your analytical skills. It'll help you to more quickly recognize scale relationships, and it also closes the gap between theory and practice. If you're a music educator who is looking to apply the principles of this video series to your classroom, then there are 3 things that I would recommend. Number 1, we want to teach scales beyond just their rote memorization. This is teaching students how to learn scales and not just teaching them scales. Number 2, make sure to use real music examples. All of this stuff can be really, really abstract and kind of philosophical, but once we ground it in how composers and musicians have actually used these scales, it becomes much more obvious. And then number 3, we want to encourage aural recognition. So not just being able to see these different types of scales on the page, but also what we hear. Music is obviously more about what we hear than what we see on the page. So make sure to encourage aural recognition of these different scales. I hope this video series on the theory of scales has been helpful to you. I hope that you will find some things to take away that will make you a better musician, make you a more expressive musician. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this series, any questions you may have, and what topic you would like us to look at next. I'll see you next time.